Welcome to Scoolinary, the online cooking school that transforms people and connects cultures. You will learn with the best chefs in the industry, and you will discover the broadest online catalog of topics related to gastronomy. We publish new courses every week. In our podcast, we have coffee with a chef every week. Each of them will tell us about their experience and their vision for the culinary world to help you better understand this exciting industry. Come on, join us for coffee. Great. So for this episode of the Scoolinary Podcast, we are joined by Lisa Ludwinski, founder and owner of Sister Pie in Detroit, Michigan. Lisa's been nominated for a James Beard Award for Outstanding Baker. She took an entrepreneurial approach to baking, and in addition to the accolades she's collected along the way, she managed to publish Sister Pie, the recipes and stories of a big-hearted bakery in Detroit. For Scoolinary, she teaches us all about American pies. For this podcast, hopefully, she'll explain why profit isn't the biggest piece of the business pie. Hi, Lisa. Welcome, and thanks for joining us for coffee.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Before we begin, are you a coffee drinker?
I am.
How do you take your coffee?
I like cold coffee the best. So I generally have cold brew with a little bit of macadamia milk when I make it at home.
Oh, delicious.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Wow. Macadamia milk. I've never tried that before. That will be next up. And in your own words, if you wouldn't mind, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where
Sure.
you're from, so that our listeners have a chance to get to know you a little bit better.
So I grew up in Michigan in the sort of Midwest area of the U.S., and I went to college to study theater arts, and then I moved to New York City when I was right out of college, so in my early 20s. And I kind of, was interested in theater still, but also interested in food. So I've had many different passions in my life, but food sort of became the most exciting one for me. And I live in Detroit now, just a 6-minute walk from my bakery, Sister Pie, with my pit bull dog, Ruby. And when I'm not at Sister Pie, I love taking her on walks and reading and doing crossword puzzles.
So you mentioned your stay in New York. Now, your entry into the culinary world is an interesting one. And if I have this correctly, you started out by essentially producing your own cooking shows while living in New York City.
Yes, I did. So that was kind of the way that I transitioned from doing theater to food. So I was actually really interested in becoming a director of theater, like a theater director. And so it was sort of a natural segue for me when I was kind of still pursuing theater, but reading a lot of food blogs and cookbooks and watching cooking shows and going to all of these incredible grocery stores in New York. I decided that I wanted to kind of teach myself how to cook and bake a little bit better. I didn't really have the funds to go back to school at that point. So I thought, well, this is sort of a DIY way of pursuing cooking. And so every week I would put my laptop computer on top of my refrigerator in my tiny Brooklyn apartment, and I would make a new recipe kind of live. So I would make the new recipe for the very first time and then edit together a 5 or 6 minute episode, post it on my blog or my vlog as it were. And I did that for about 2 years and produced 100 episodes. They were very scrappy, I guess you could say. And everything, it ranged from like me making croissants to fried chicken to then dressing up as, Lady Gaga and recording an interview with myself as Lisa and myself as Lady Gaga as she tried a cocktail that I made for her. So it really stretched my imagination.
Where can we find those videos now?
So they're on YouTube. They're not all still available because I am a little embarrassed of some of them, I hate to say. But a lot of them are still available on YouTube. If you search Lisa Ludwinski, you should be able to find some.
It sounds actually a little bit pioneering because, as you noted, it was a vlog, and that seems like it was probably in one of the early stages of vlogging. Would you agree with that?
I was really inspired by cooking blogs that people would post, writing up a little blurb about a recipe that they tried and then including pictures. And so I thought, I've loved watching, Barefoot Contessa and Julia Child and all these people on the Food Network growing up. And so I kind of wanted to try my hand at that. And then I would say after that, and even to this day with TikTok, it's really kind of blown up to see videos that show people how to make food online. And so it was kind of early on for that. I would agree.
Wow. That's a pretty nice, something pretty nice to add to your experience, to add to your resume.
Yeah, it was really fun. And I got some cool opportunities. I got to film a little episode for a cooking show that aired on TV. And then I was also eventually part of a sort of larger YouTube food channel, a food network basically on YouTube called Hungry Nation. And so there were other food vloggers around who were kind of doing similar things. And so there was sort of this cool energy behind it in New York back in the early 2000s.
Now, were you doing this video work, this recording, at the same time you were working in professional kitchens?
Somewhat. So I worked many different jobs in New York, often at the same time. And so when I first lived there, I was working mostly as a nanny and a barista and a juice shop, etc. And so I worked as a nanny actually for 4 years. And that was sort of my longest job while I was in New York, because I lived there for 6 years. And that was actually, a great gig to have while I pursued this cooking show on the side, because my hours were a little bit more flexible. But then while I was doing the cooking show, I decided to apply to work behind the counter at Momofuku Milk Bar, which was at that point a new bakery that I was really excited about. And so once I applied there, I did the cooking show for about a year into that job. And then once I transitioned to being full-time in the kitchen at the job, I wanted to focus my efforts and energy toward that. So I kind of phased out the cooking show eventually.
Wow. Momofuku Milk Bar is certainly really well known worldwide now. And you worked in a few different kitchens along your way to creating Sister Pie, I gather. What are some of the most valuable things you learned from that experience?
For sure. I mean, I'm so grateful that I had those opportunities, especially given that I didn't have a traditional culinary background. So people really took a chance on me. And I think one valuable thing I learned was that I was someone who, liked baking at home. I liked making a batch of cookies that was, that would create like 3 dozen cookies. But I also liked making a batch of cookies that would create 100 cookies or 200 cookies. And so that was a big thing, I think, for anyone going into food from kind of a home experience perspective is recognizing that you still enjoy that task, even if it's on this like larger scale. And it isn't just like making cookies for yourself or your friends, but that you're, kind of more mass producing things. And so learning about that style of baking and cooking and the sort of tips and tricks when you are scaling up recipes and how you can do these things in bulk, whether for you that's making a batch that has, 24 pounds of butter, or, at Sister Pie, we make batches that have 4 pounds of butter. So still kind of small in the grand scheme of things, but kind of learning about that was really helpful and inspiring as I was thinking about starting something on my own. And I think in that same way, kind of watching the different businesses that I was a part of sort of kind of respond to their level of success, their level of fame, and what choices they made as an entrepreneur to respond to that. So, for example, Christina Tosi had, crazy amounts of success and fame from Milk Bar. And so from there, she's written several cookbooks. She's opened many, many locations. Yeah. And you can now get her cookies, I think, in, grocery stores and things. And so she really was able to kind of take this small business and turn it into this worldwide, like you said, like globally known company. And, then I also worked at 4 and 20 Blackbirds for a summer, just a little pie shop in Brooklyn. And I think they have 2 locations. And so they kind of, also had, it was sort of a different level of fame, but they had a lot of recognition for their extremely delicious pies. And they sort of, stayed kind of smaller and and made that choice. And so I think being able to watch these two businesses that I admired and sort of see their choices helped me to understand and refine what I wanted to do when I opened a business.
Right.
And
And
then,
undaunted, you went on to start Sister Pie. So listeners who haven't yet taken your Scoolinary course might want to know how you started Sister Pie. I was wondering if you could give us a little history on that.
yeah, absolutely. So one thing that was really helpful for me understanding what I was going to do next was when I was at Momofuku, David Chang offered a scholarship to any of the employees who worked under the Momofuku umbrella. You could apply for a scholarship to go work for 2 weeks anywhere in the world. You would get paid for those 2 weeks, your regular wages. You had to kind of cover everything else, figure out how you were going to get there, where you were going to stay, et cetera. So out of all the places that I could think of going, I wanted to go to Michigan, back to my home, so that I could spend a week at Avalon International Breads in Detroit, Michigan, and then Zingerman's Bakehouse in Ann Arbor, Michigan, because both of these businesses were operating with a triple bottom line, focusing on people, planet, and profit. And they were known and are still known in Michigan as two businesses that really have a positive impact in their communities. And I was really interested in kind of seeing how that worked. And so I went and spent a week at each place learning about making bread, but also really learning about how these businesses functioned with those things in mind. And that was what really inspired me then a year later to leave New York, move in with my parents in the fall of 2012. And I started experimenting with recipes. And then by Thanksgiving, big pie holiday here in the US, the biggest one,
Yes.
I launched Sister Pie out of their kitchen and, made about 40 pies for family and friends who had ordered from me. And then from there, I spent a year kind of experimenting with more recipes, selling products directly to family and friends. And then I moved into a shared commercial kitchen in the city of Detroit because I grew up in the suburbs, about 45 minutes from the city. And so then I moved myself and Sister Pie to the city and started renting a commercial kitchen, was able to kind of expand and get my products in little markets and coffee shops. And that eventually took me to a place where that eventually got me to the place where I was ready to open a brick and mortar location. And I found a space in the West Village of Detroit, which was right across the street from one of the markets that I was selling my products at. So it was this really great way for me to learn that current customers of Sister Pie were ready to travel to that particular place and keep buying my pie, but also that people in the surrounding neighborhood and area were really interested in what I was doing and supported me opening a bakery there. And that was really key to me being welcomed into the neighborhood and having a set of customers who were ready to come to my shop as soon as we opened the doors. And that was in April of 2015.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the Thanksgiving open date because as you said, that's a big pie holiday. Now, how far back did you plan to hit that date to launch Sister Pie?
Not too far back. I mean, I moved in with my parents in September, and
Oh,
so
wow.
I gave myself a couple weeks. I mean, and I launched it on a very small scale, of course, but I gave myself a couple weeks to just kind of chill. And then I don't have a lot of ability to chill, so in October I started planning and testing the recipes, and then on I think it was like November 9th. I sent out the email with the menu to anyone that I knew who lived in Michigan, which at that point was, probably like 50 people. And then I made those pies for a couple weeks from then. And that's sort of when we started. So it was quick. I kind of just wanted to experiment with it. I think that was sort of one of the privileges I had in being able to live with my parents for a minute and let them kind of help me. They were excited about me coming back to Michigan and having me close again, and
Yeah, sure.
excited about me potentially opening a business in Detroit. My dad has run a business in Detroit since before I was born. So kind of carrying on a family tradition in that way. And so they were super supportive of this. which, was instrumental for me in being able to do it. So my mom was helping me, make my shopping lists, and um, my dad was giving me his critique on the flavors. And so, that was really great. And I think, along the way, I was able to have the luxury of saying, okay, I can try this. And if it's not for me, then I'm going to try something else. And so that's why I kind of wanted to just like get going right away. I didn't want to, start planning immediately to open a store. I wanted to kind of take it little step by little step in order to see if I liked it, but also if other people even liked what I was doing.
Yeah. One of the questions I that you just sparked was, just out of curiosity, what was on the menu for that in that email?
Yeah, totally. So it was an apple cheddar rye pie. So an apple pie with a cheddar rye crust, kind of similar to the apple sage Gouda that I think there's an apple sage Gouda in the Scoolinary. Actually, I don't remember.
Yes, there is. Yes, there
Okay,
is.
okay.
Yep.
So the apple cheddar rye is very similar to the apple sage Gouda that is in my American Pie series. And then sweet potato marshmallow. So that was a sweet potato pie with a marshmallow meringue topping. Then there was pumpkin chocolate chip, which is one that I look back on and kind of regret. It was like a pumpkin pie. It's hard to, Americans are so obsessive over pumpkin pie being traditional. So
Yeah.
that's one that we like sometimes don't even put on our menu anymore because everyone's grandma has a pumpkin pie recipe. It's probably from the back of the Libby's pumpkin can, and you just don't try to mess with it. And so the times that I've tried to mess with it haven't been as successful or popular. So there was that one. And then there was a brandy pecan. So a traditional pecan pie, but with apple brandy in the filling. And then there were crushed up pecans in the buttery crust too. So it was very pecan forward. And I think I'm missing one. Oh, my favorite pie. My favorite pie that is on every Thanksgiving menu still to this day is cranberry crumble, which is made with Michigan cranberries. It's very tart and it has a delicious oat crumble topping. And I love the textural, I love the textural landscape of the pie with like the flaky buttery crust and then the tart juicy filling and the sweet kind of crunchy top. It is to me the epitome of delicious pie.
I think you had me at the apple cheddar rye pie, to be honest. But who knew that pumpkin pie was untouchable? That seems kind of a clean slate. You can really flex a little creative muscle with pumpkin pie. But I guess maybe you better
Yeah.
not.
I mean, we've tried different things, but I think, it's, I learned actually from my own family because my mom is in charge of ordering the sister pie every year. She'll be in the, everyone has to get ready online at 9 a.m. some date in early November for when the sister pie Thanksgiving menu goes live. And it's kind of chaotic. And my mom is always ready. And she usually has one of the very first orders in, and she picks her pies that she wants for our family Thanksgiving dinner. But pumpkin is not one of them typically. There will always be someone else bringing a pumpkin pie to our family Thanksgiving. And so I sort of, witness what my own family does and considered that a lot of other families were probably doing that. Like someone's going to bring the sister pie to Thanksgiving, and that's going to be sort of like the non-traditional sort of unique pie, but there's definitely also going to be a traditional pumpkin pie that someone's grandma made. And so I'm just going to let that, I'm going to embrace that and give us the challenge of making, the different pie.
Yeah, that's a little liberating, isn't it?
It is because also, to be fair, pumpkin pie isn't always as easy to bake as you would think because the pie filling kind of cracks as it cools. And so we always try to find some, when that's homemade and you have a cracked pumpkin pie, it's like, this is homemade, no big deal. But when you're buying it from a bakery, you want it to look perfect. And so we would always be kind of trying to figure out, well, what can we put on top of the pumpkin pie, like to make it unique, like a streusel or something.
Yeah.
But I just like it when pumpkin pie isn't on our list.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Was there a specific moment when you decided to move Sister Pie out of the shared commercial kitchen and into its own space, kind of like a light bulb going off or something,
Yes,
one moment.
100%. I remember the moment when I was sitting. So there was a market that used to be across the street from Sister Pie in the West Village in Detroit. And that was, I mentioned earlier, one of the places where I was first selling my pies and cookies and scones. And it was a market owned by my friends. So they kind of let me experiment. And I was sitting there with my coworker one day, Angie, who worked for Sister Pie for a long time. And we were just kind of sitting back after a long day of work, and we looked across the street at this hair salon that had recently closed. And it was this corner location, good size. And I just said, what if we just opened in that space? So we called the landlord, and the next thing you know, we're renting it and demoing it and getting it ready. And so it was kind of a light bulb moment, and it came at the right time, because I think when I first started, one of the reasons, beyond wanting to give myself time to kind of ease into it, I didn't know Detroit very well. I didn't grow up spending much time in Detroit, and so I didn't know the neighborhoods. I didn't feel like I kind of fit in a particular place yet. But once I started bringing my pies to the West Village and hanging out at that market, I felt like I was getting to know the neighbors and the community. And it was a place that I also wanted to live. And so once I felt kind of at home in that neighborhood, that's when it made sense for me to open my business there.
So how do you transform, actually, how did you transform your kitchen into a successful business? What were some of your main challenges when you opened Sister Pie on that street corner in Detroit?
I would say that the biggest challenge right away, and sort of like the most abrupt transition for me, was that I was suddenly a boss to many people. um, when I was doing it out of the shared commercial kitchen, it was just me and one other person for most of the time. And so we just kind of held each other accountable and did what we needed to do. But obviously, when you open a place and people already know about you, you're going to have customers that need to be served and people who need to be trained on making the things. And I would say I wasn't fully prepared for that. And so, in the 8.5 years since I opened that location, I've been learning about being a boss. And I think that continues to be the most challenging thing, because it's always changing. The needs of people are changing. The way that businesses are run are always changing. And so I need to always be on my toes with how to cultivate the culture at Sister Pie that feels like it is serving everyone well. And that's something that I think will never I'll never be settled. I'll always be learning about that, and my employees will be helping me learn about it. And that is also, it's the type of thing that can keep me up at night, because these are people, these are people's lives, and we're all trying to make this thing work as best as it possibly can. And that is sometimes complicated and difficult. And so I think that was not only one of the biggest challenges, it was one of the biggest surprises to me. And I feel almost naive that I didn't consider it much before, but it's also one of those things you don't really know how to prepare for it until you're in it.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's the big one. And then I think another one is just kind of figuring out how to make the right amount of things so that you're not wasting. Baked goods are best the day they're made, and the pies have a slightly longer shelf life. Like when we'll make a pie and we can sell it for a couple of days, and it's just as delicious.
Yeah.
But with something like a freshly baked scone, we only want to sell that the first day it was made. It's just not going to be something that does well if it sits overnight. And so we've experimented, with different numbers all the time. And, sometimes we sell out of things way earlier than our customers would like us to. And other times we sell out at kind of the perfect time, like maybe a half an hour before we're meant to close. And that's also kind of a continuous challenge, is figuring out how to, get the right amount of stuff made so that customers are happy. We're not wasting food. One thing that we do is if at the end of the day, whatever we have left that's not a pie, we will package into these little grab bags. They have a $10 value and we sell them for $5 the next day. So it's kind of like
Oh,
day
yeah.
old baked
Mm-hmm.
goods.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think, a lot of these challenges just come with experimenting and trying things and seeing what sticks and what doesn't.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned you don't only do pie. There are scones, there are savory pies, cookies, and other baked goods. But pie seems to still be the main business for Sister Pie. It seems to be in the name. Why pie?
Yeah. So I think for one thing, I love pie. It's definitely like one of my favorite one of my favorite formats of dessert because as I described earlier, I like the textural landscape of it with the flaky crust and the, creamy or fruity filling, and sometimes a topping. It's just so good. But I think in moving back to Michigan, I was struck by how much delicious produce there is in Michigan. It's actually the second most agriculturally diverse state in the whole country, in the US, second only to California. Now, of course,
Yeah.
California grows lemons and limes, and we don't grow those, but we have the ability with our climate and our landscape to grow a lot of different things. And you can pretty much go to the farmer's market and anything you could buy there, you could figure out how to put into a pie. Pie is talk about a blank canvas. Pie is the perfect one because you can puree a sweet potato or you can dice up an apple or you can, mix together cream and eggs and maple syrup and you've got a delicious pie. And so for me, as a kind of creative person and someone who wanted to get weird with pie flavors, I loved that I could follow a seasonal structure with what was being grown in Michigan and that would inspire us to make pie and within that also help us work with local farmers because we would be kind of at the mercy of whatever they were growing, and so we would order what they're growing and that's what we turn into a pie. And so it's something that I love to eat and I love that it can be shared amongst people. It's a
Oh, yeah.
communal dessert. So, I mean, I could really go on about pie forever and ever, but those are some of the main reasons.
Well, you mentioned some of your pie creations, or many of your pie creations, are driven by peak season produce, for example. Now, on top of that, there can also be layers of flavor. So, if you're willing, can you let us in on how you develop new pie flavors?
Sure. Yeah. So, with a fruit pie, like say, for example, I'm doing rhubarb. Rhubarb is typically the first kind of fresh produce that we get in the springtime in Michigan. And while it's technically a vegetable, it's usually, cut and tossed with sugar and put into a pie. And I love rhubarb in the same way that I love cranberries because it's very tart. And so when I've got rhubarb, and I know that's the only thing I've got right now, it then kind of frees my mind up. So I know that I'm going to do an all butter flaky crust because that's what we do as the beginning for all of our pies. And then from there, I'm thinking what's going to kind of take this rhubarb pie to the next level, not your average grocery store rhubarb pie. And so I'm usually thinking about flavors that come from herbs, like fresh herbs or citrus or nuts or seeds or cheese or just anything delicious that I like to eat that is sort of has the ability to help flavor something or bring another layer or depth to it. And so in the spring, we make a rhubarb rosemary streusel. So it's a rhubarb filling and it has a little bit of orange in it and sugar and tapioca starch, which is the thickener that we use. And then in the streusel topping, we finely chop fresh rosemary. And when you bite into the pie, you get this little scent of rosemary that just makes the experience of eating a slice of pie a little different, gives you a little something else. And that's how I kind of approach it. Like, how can we make something that is sort of rooted in this traditional method? We'll still have a familiarity to it, but there's just one thing about it that makes it a little unique, that makes it different from a pie that I've had before. And so from there, it's kind of, you can do so many different things. And so that's kind of how I like to approach it from this sort of whimsical perspective of what if I just threw some chopped up sunflower seeds in this? Or what if I tried it with some ricotta cheese? Just all
Yeah.
the things that I love to eat put into a pie.
Well, you've mentioned too that you really like rhubarb being one of them and the cranberry crumble being another one. Do you have a favorite pie?
Those would definitely be up there as two of the favorites. I would say I kind of have a tart fruit pie for every season that I like. Right now in the shop in late August, we're making stone fruit cardamom streusel. And so we can kind of put whatever stone fruit we're able to get in there. So right now it's peaches and apricots and cherries, so sour cherries. And
Oh,
so we mix those together with sugar and some lemon juice, and then on top is a cardamom streusel, so ground cardamom in the streusel topping. And I love the way that the peaches and apricots cook down into this really jammy, velvety filling, and the texture is just unbelievably satisfying. And that's the one that I'm going for these days.
yeah. Yeah, that sounds really delicious. Uh, and so pie can accommodate a variety of ingredients as we've been speaking about here. So does pie have a season to it? And I'm not just talking about what we put in the pie, but as kind of a business perspective. Is there a high demand, low demand for pie? Uh, People need pie for special occasions beyond Thanksgiving, Christmas, etc.
I think that it's always pie season because there's always a holiday, whether it's kind of a nationally recognized holiday or somebody's birthday or a celebration. People always want pie around. And I think that people get more excited certain times of the year for pie. So, for example, in the summer when the fruit is happening, people are, really, really happy to come to the shop and try a slice of pie. But we really don't have a slow season. And so, that's, I mean, maybe in late January, in the depths of winter, we might get a little bit slower, but that's also a time when people want comfort food. And so people are coming for a slice of lemon pie to brighten their winter day. And so we always find that we have hungry pie customers, no matter what time of year it is.
Well, you also seem to be making a really inventive product, so that has a draw to it as well. So all the pies you've described so far sound delicious.
Well, thank you.
So let's talk pie crust.
Okay.
Pie crust exists in a world unto its own and can be sometimes intimidating to home cooks like myself. Do you have any advice for how to feel more confident about making pie crust from scratch?
For sure. I think the big one isn't any tip or trick about the recipe itself, but it's that if you really want to get good at pie crust, you have to practice. And I think that's something that I didn't really realize until I started a pie business, because I would make a pie maybe once or twice a year, maybe a couple times a summer. And every time I would feel pretty intimidated, like I didn't really know what I was doing. But making pie crust is really a practice like making bread. You have to do it over and over again to become familiar with the intuition that's needed to make the right decisions, to know how to handle the dough. It's really overwhelming or intimidating sometimes to just follow a recipe and not quite know what you're looking for in the end product. And so the opportunity to make pie over and over again is not only a super delicious one, but it will also help you build your confidence. And so that's kind of my number one piece of advice when people come to my pie crust classes is in the repetition of making pie, you will feel so much more confident about it. And other than that, a lot of it relates to temperature and being able to recognize that cold ingredients are going to help you make the best pie dough, because you want the butter chunks, the larger butter chunks, to stay intact so that they don't melt down and become homogeneous with the rest of the ingredients. Because when those butter chunks stay intact and you go into a hot oven with them, they're going to burst, and that's how flaky pie crust is created. And so things like making sure to use really cold water when you pour in the liquid, or even keeping your tools in the fridge or freezer before you get started to kind of make sure that everything's super cold. Or even when you're making the dough and you start to feel it get warm, you could throw it in the fridge for 10 minutes and then come back to it. So that kind of leads me to my third point. I think it's my third point, which is related to the first point, which is patience. You know, I struggle with patience as a person so hard. It's so difficult for me. Like when I'm walking my dog and she doesn't want to move, I sometimes almost have a meltdown. But becoming a bakery owner has really taught me how to exercise patience. And I think with recipes, I often used to try to speed through some of the steps where it would say rest the dough in the fridge for 2 hours, or, wait until you slice the pie until it's fully cooled. I would never follow those instructions, but now I know how important they are. So when my recipe for pie dough says chill the dough in the fridge for 2 hours before you roll it out, you should really do that, because it's going to make the process easier for you in the long run, because your dough will have fully chilled. It'll be a better dough to work with because it won't be falling apart, and it will ultimately create a more delicious crust.
You know what? But what you just said right now is key, because it sounds like some of these instructions are kind of arbitrary. They tell you to do something, but not necessarily tell you why. I
Exactly.
think if
That's
we knew more about the why, then it'd be, oh, okay, I can be patient for that if that's a result I'm going to get. So in
totally.
your
And
defense,
when I wrote the Sister Pie cookbook, I was the most confident about the pie dough chapter, because I've taught so many pie dough classes over the past 7 years that I've really vocalized all of these things many times. And I think when I then wrote them in, and that's true with my staff too, if I tell them to do something but I don't explain why we do it, they're not going to be that likely to do it. And so if you can really share the why behind something, it is so helpful.
oh yes. So are the pie crusts at Sister Pie all made by hand?
So we do part of the process by hand. For a very long time, we would make the dough in a big bowl. Each person would make one that had 2 pounds of butter in it, and you would cut up the butter, use the pastry blender to cut the butter into the flour. And then after you add the liquid, you bring the dough together with your hands. And it's a very laborious process. And we would only get 9 crusts from one batch of that, but it would take about a half an hour for someone to make it. And so eventually it was becoming very clear to us that wasn't financially okay. And so I didn't want to lose the whole process of us doing it by hand, though. And so what we do now is we do the step with the butter, where we cut it all up by hand using the pastry blender and the bench scraper. And then we put that into a mixer, and then we pour water into the mixer and let it mix for about 40 seconds, so that we're taking the part where the human hands are like kneading the dough basically to bring it together. It's not really kneading, but it's kind of like pressing on it. And it's very, like I said, laborious and could be sort of hard on people's wrists. So we took that step out. So it goes into the mixer, and then once it's mixed, we bring it out and we put it back on the wooden table and portion it and make sure that it gets all wrapped up and into the fridge. And it's actually made our dough even better that way, because we have more of a structure for the recipe, where it would sometimes take people different amounts of time to bring the dough together with their hands, just based on each individual's strength. And so that meant that sometimes the dough was inconsistent, or some people's butter was melting.
Right.
Now we sort of have nailed the process. I think at home, I would still recommend doing the whole thing by hand. But if it is tricky for you, you could do the same thing, but use a food processor for the part where you add the liquid.
Oh, all right. You mentioned in your Meet Your Instructor video for your course on Scoolinary that you've committed to staying as small as possible while being sustainable. And sustainability is something that you mentioned earlier. Do you think that scaling up your business and remaining sustainable are incompatible?
I don't necessarily know that they're incompatible, but I know that I'm not interested in scaling up to a large level. Like
Sure.
I've never been interested in multiple locations or shipping my product. And there are definitely sustainable reasons or sustainability reasons like within that, I guess. But it also kind of boils down to like, what is my vision for what this business is to other people? And I like that Sister Pie is this one place that you can go to have this pie, and that it has its own community within it. And so whether you're someone who comes every day or you're someone who's visiting from out of town and you come in, you have that feeling when you walk in the door that this is Sister Pie, and it's unique, and it's the only place in the world where this exists. And that to me is very special, and I want to cultivate that. And at the same time, within that, I can kind of keep our operations small and work toward a situation in which all of the employees, like, we're all kind of thriving in a lot of different ways because we're focused on this one place, this one thing. I think one of my biggest fears about scaling bigger than that, or like opening multiple locations or scaling kind of beyond what we're doing, is that people get lost in the shuffle of
Yeah.
that.
Mm-hmm. True.
And I've kind of always wanted to be in a situation where I know every employee's name and I'm checking in with them personally. And that, that can be a big challenge too. And I sort of sometimes struggle with, the boundaries. And, I'm at Sister Pie almost every day of the week. And that, I'm still trying to figure out what does it mean for Sister Pie to be sustainable for me, Lisa? That is a tough question sometimes, and one I'm, working on, but often pushing aside. But I know that's how I want to run the business. And it's a little, rooted in some sort of kind of old fashioned style mom and pop business, but with a goal that, it's not just the person who started the business that is dealing with. I'm really interested in exploring cooperative style models of running a business, whether that's, every employee has an ownership stake or there's a profit sharing element. But, what I'm really moving toward, as I explore kind of what hierarchy looks like within this model, is a situation in which I'm working with a community of people where we both share the stress and the benefit of Sister Pie's success. And that's kind of what I'm moving toward. And I've got some people in my orbit. Oh, did that pick up on your
Yeah,
end?
that's fine.
Okay. I've got some people in my orbit who are helping me, ask those questions and explore them. And that's kind of, what I'm thinking about next.
So you really give people a compelling reason to visit Detroit. Not only, I mean, not just for, going in and having a slice of pie, but you're also teaching classes, which give another motive to head your way. How often do you teach classes, and what kind of people are attending your classes? Or how far away are they attending from?
So we generally teach about 10 to 12 classes a month. There are 2 other teachers outside of myself. We teach 5 different types of classes right now. And, it's everyone from people who live in our neighborhood to people who are traveling from other states, even sometimes, to spend a weekend in Detroit and take a class. And that's actually a big part of our growth plan. Right now, I'm working on taking over the whole building that we're in and renting, or not. We're actually going to be purchasing the whole building and using the back space to build out a classroom that will also function as extra kitchen space for us. And so that's kind of where I see a big part of the future, because the classes have a different profit margin for us. So, selling baked goods sometimes can be a really tough financial stretch. And so having something like the classes where, you're buying a ticket to a class and it's more of an educational experience, it's less of a draw from, the hourly employees. And
Yeah.
so we can kind of balance things out in the revenue stream that way.
Now, these are what you've suggested are kind of really integral to Sister Pie. If you take a step up 10,000 feet, if you will, What would you like the bakery cafe sector to be like in the near future? In other words, if you could design it, how would you do it?
The general bake, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I think it goes back to a little bit of what I was saying about the cooperative style. I think that in any food business, um, oftentimes the people who are making the food and running the business are paid not enough. They're not paid enough for the work that they do, and oftentimes the business owner isn't paid enough either. But what I'm hoping in the future is that customers and consumers are valuing food higher. Um, and that comes all the way from the starting with the ingredients and the farmers and the people who are making the things that we then turn into baked goods, understanding that the work that goes into that is tremendous, and that it is worth it to pay a little more than you maybe thought originally for a cookie if you choose to visit a bakery instead of getting it, packaged from a grocery store. Because ultimately, when I run up against issues, a lot of it boils down to, if only we could charge a little bit more for this, we wouldn't be struggling so hard to pay everyone what is
Yeah.
at this point considered a living wage. But, you know, I would like us, to be a little higher than what's considered a living wage, because a living wage for people who have children and other responsibilities is barely a living wage. Our average hourly wage at Sister Pie is $19 an hour, which
Wow.
is, more than double the minimum wage in the state. But isn't is I still would like it to be higher, and so I'd like that to become more of a standard within bakeries, so that we're all doing that. Because when you're the only one, or you're one of a few, then it doesn't translate. Like, then you're like, well, why am I paying this much for a cookie here and this much for a cookie here? And our prices are actually, relatively speaking, our cookie price, for example, is much lower than most of the industry standards around us.
Hmm.
And part of that has been because we want to keep our product accessible and affordable, but we can't do it all, and so there does need to be a change of a larger change that comes from just the general population, and their and everyone's, honestly, I mean, this is another thing I could go on for a long time about, but like in general, like raising the minimum wage, having more people be able to afford to pay these higher prices. I mean, it all, it's all a cycle. It all works. If we can make all of it work together, then we can change the world. But so
Yeah.
it's a real systems thing. And I think businesses in the transition need support from the government to be able to, take those leaps, to be able to pay their employees more. And so there is financial support that's needed in the transition, and that's where we really need government support to be able to help us do that.
For sure. And I was wondering, as you were speaking about this, do you see any kind of glimmers of hope or some examples of where these shifts or this shift toward more equitable, uh, sustainable living is possible within your sector or within the industry as a whole?
It depends on the day you ask me. I mean, I've seen some of my fellow business owners in Detroit shut down their businesses because it has been so hard to do this. And so some days I feel pretty down about it, but I also know that there are other businesses out there who are striving for this as well. And there's organizations like One Fair Wage and Raise in the US that are working toward better conditions for food workers and higher wages, and they support businesses like mine. And so there's definitely a lot of people out there who are fighting for this too alongside us. But in the day to day of running the business, it can be pretty stressful. Um, and, as a business owner, I'm the first one to take a pay cut when we don't have enough money to run payroll. And
Right.
so when I can't take care of myself, I'm not very good at taking care of others either, And so it is a really, really difficult business to be in. And I wish that it wasn't that way. because I feel so passionate about it and I love feeding people. And I know that our customers love coming. And so, there's some challenges there, but I feel inspired to keep going.
Yeah, well, I think your customers are demanding a new cookbook to follow up your sister pie cookbook, and I want to know, will we see that anytime soon?
I'm hoping. There's definitely interest from my agent and my publisher for me to start working on that. It's just I need more hours in the day, I think. But I've got a whole list of recipes, um, and I just need to find some time to sit down and write out that book proposal.
Oh, so it could be on it. You have a whole list of
Oh,
recipes. Well, we'll have to
a
stay
whole list
tuned
of
for that.
recipes. I mean,
Oh,
honestly, on Instagram, people are always asking, "Where's the recipe for that? Will you write a second cookbook?" So the demand is there, the recipes are there. I just need to grow another body, and I'll be ready to go.
oh, good argument for cloning at the moment.
Exactly.
Who would you recommend for an episode of this podcast? Someone related to the culinary one. Who would be your personal pick?
Ooh. Let me see. Well, one of my friends here in Detroit, her name is April Anderson, and she runs a bakery called Good Cakes and Bakes. And I think it would be a cool perspective to see kind of what her experience is like running a business in Detroit that is similar to mine in a lot of ways, although her focus is, of course, on cake. Um, and she's someone who actually, we started our businesses like right around the exact same time. We did a pop up together back in 2013. And so I'd be interested to hear about her answers to some of these same questions. And she's a really cool person to talk to.
Great, thank you very much. That is all I've got for. Well, no, actually, that's not. I could go on for hours, but in the spirit of keeping this a little tight, that's all I have for right now. But I really want to say thanks, Lisa, for joining us for coffee. I really, really enjoyed the conversation.
I did too. Thank you for such insightful questions.
Oh, thank you. If you liked this episode, don't miss an episode by becoming a member. We're waiting for you each week with more guests. We're on all podcast platforms. Just search for Coffee with Scoolinary. We're also waiting for you at our website and on our social networks, where you can get to know all our courses and teachers.